What began as a solemn and peaceful funeral quickly turned into a shocking moment when a horse accidentally stepped on the coffin. As the wood shattered, attendees were left frozen in disbelief when unexpected cries emerged from inside. Was this a heartbreaking accident, or could there be a deeper mystery behind this chilling event? Join us as we uncover the truth behind this extraordinary story. Could this surprising twist make us rethink the fragile line between life and death? If this story amazed or intrigued you, don't forget to like, share, and comment your thoughts below. What would you do if you were there? Remember to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss more dramatic and unforgettable stories. At the funeral, the horse went berserk, kicking the coffin until the lid cracked open. What spilled out left everyone paralyzed with shock. Mourners, dressed in black, stood frozen in grief and disbelief, their hearts heavy with sorrow. The air was thick with sadness as the tragic scene unfolded before their eyes. The mourning in the small, dusty town of Laredo, Texas was as quiet and unassuming as any other. The parched earth stretched endlessly, mirroring Johnny's spirit, unwavering and steadfast. A man who had spent his life tilling the stubborn fields, inhaling the dry air, and caring for the few animals on his modest ranch. Johnny was known by all for his quiet diligence. He had never yearned for a life beyond these rugged plains. His solace lay in the furrows of the soil, the distant crow of roosters greeting the dawn, and the peaceful rhythm of his morning tasks. The silence was abruptly broken as Johnny's neighbor, Depp, rushed toward him, breathless. "Johnny," he called, his voice edged with urgency. Johnny muttered there was a foal abandoned by the river trail, barely able to stand, and it looked like someone had just left it there. He expressed pity for the poor thing, shaking his head in sorrow. In that instant, an invisible string seemed to tug at his heart, compelling him to act without hesitation, his steps swift and determined. Johnny set down his tools, his mind made up. He was already moving toward the trail before Depp had even finished speaking. This wasn't the first time he'd stepped in to save a helpless animal, but something about Depp's words struck him with an urgency he couldn't ignore. It felt different this time, as though this encounter was meant to be, a force beyond his control urging him forward. When he arrived, the sight before him halted him in his tracks. By the side of the dusty road lay the foal, a fragile and trembling figure barely clinging to life. Its coat, caked with dirt, clung tightly to its skeletal frame. The foal's large, dark eyes gazed up at Johnny, filled with a haunting blend of fear and exhaustion. "Oh, little one, what have they done to you?" Johnny murmured, his voice soft and reassuring as he approached cautiously. He knew the foal was in a precarious state. Any sudden movement might frighten it and drain what little strength it had left. As he moved closer, the foal tried to rise on its spindly legs, but they buckled under its weight, sending it crashing back to the ground in a puff of dust. A small group of passers-by paused on the trail to watch, their murmurs laced with skepticism. One man, older and wearing a straw hat, shook his head grimly. "Johnny, that foal's as good as gone. Why trouble yourself? It'll just be another burden for you." Johnny barely acknowledged the words, his attention entirely on the small creature before him. Its labored breaths and trembling frame spoke of a life hanging by a thread. Johnny believed every living being held worth, no matter how small or frail. When his gaze met the foal's, he saw it a faint glimmer of life, fragile yet defiant. That flicker was all the confirmation he needed. Without hesitation he knelt and, with great care, lifted the foal into his arms. The animal was alarmingly light, its frailty almost heartbreaking. Johnny felt the slight shivers against him but whispered soothingly, "I've got you now. As long as you're breathing, there's hope." Determined, he began the long walk back to his ranch. The onlookers exchanged doubtful glances, but Johnny paid them no mind. In his heart, this foal was no burden. It was a promise, a responsibility he was bound to honor. Johnny gently laid the foal on a bed of fresh straw in the old barn, his heart heavy but filled with a quiet determination. He watched as the animal shifted slightly, finding a semblance of comfort for the first time. He said softly, "I'll call you Dolly," a faint smile touching his lips. The name felt right, a beacon of life and hope, a testament to the second chance he was determined to give this fragile being. Dolly was not just a name. It was a vow. Johnny silently promised to do everything within his reach to save this foal, no matter the cost. That night he stayed awake by the barn door, his watchful eyes never leaving Dolly. Occasionally he would approach, offering water and murmuring gentle words of encouragement. "Rest, Dolly," he whispered, his voice a quiet balm in the stillness. "Tomorrow will be better." As dawn's first light crept over the horizon, Johnny approached the barn again, his heart a mix of trepidation and hope. The night had felt endless, every small sound and faint movement keeping him on edge. Stepping inside, he knew one thing for sure. He would fight for Dolly's survival, one small step at a time. The foal seemed calmer now, though her breathing was still weak. With each step closer, Johnny's heart raced, fearing she might be lifeless. But there she was, resting on the hay. Her large dark eyes met his, tired yet grateful. Determined, Johnny wasted no time. He would not let her go without a fight. Johnny carefully lifted Dolly into his arms and set out for the town vet, an older, seasoned man with a deep understanding of animals. Though the road wasn't far on a chilly morning, the journey felt like an eternity. With every step he took, Dolly's frail body seemed to grow heavier, her labored breaths causing his heart to tighten with worry. The discomfort and exhaustion in her small frame were palpable. When he finally arrived, the vet stepped outside to greet them, his sharp eyes narrowing as he studied the weak foal in Johnny's arms. "What do we have here, Johnny?" the vet asked, adjusting his glasses as he inspected her critically. Johnny explained, "It's Dolly," in a low, steady voice, though inside a storm of worry raged. "I found her abandoned near the river. I couldn't just leave her there." The vet nodded, a quiet understanding passing between them as he saw the bond forming between Johnny and the struggling animal. After a thorough examination, the vet sighed heavily, his face serious. "Listen, Johnny, I don't want to give you false hope," he began. He paused. "Dolly is extremely weak. Her body barely has the strength to sustain her, and honestly, the prognosis isn't good, even with weeks of care." Searching for the right words. "She still might not make it." Johnny's stomach knotted at the vet's somber tone, but he refused to let doubt take hold. He looked down at Dolly, her shallow breaths barely rising and falling as she lay on the examination table, her body trembling in exhaustion. "As long as she's still breathing, Doc, I'm not giving up," Johnny replied firmly, his voice steady with resolve. It was clear to both men that Dolly wasn't just an animal. To Johnny, she was a promise and a commitment. The vet nodded, impressed by Johnny's determination, and handed him a set of instructions. "She'll need soft food that's easy to digest. Keep her warm. Especially at night, the cold could make things worse," he advised, giving Johnny a small bottle of vitamins and a few more tips. "Do your best, Johnny, and may God be with you." With a renewed sense of purpose, Johnny left the clinic, his heart heavy but determined to fight for Dolly's survival, no matter the cost. Johnny cradled Dolly in his arms as he made his way home, his heart weighed down by hope and worry. That night, his work began in earnest. Following the vet's advice, he carefully prepared a mixture of warm milk and softened feed, offering it to Dolly in small portions. At first, she refused, her weakened body barely responding, but Johnny was patient. He spoke to her softly, his words laced with comfort and encouragement as if they could help her find the strength to keep fighting. "Come on, Dolly. You're not alone. I'm right here with you," he whispered, gently stroking her thin back. He felt her frail bones beneath his hand, but his touch was tender, filled with hope that his warmth and care might reignite her will to live. Days blurred into weeks, and Johnny never left Dolly's side. He woke in the dead of night to feed her, keeping her warm as the cold winter air seeped into the barn through the cracks. Every day felt like a small victory, a constant struggle fought with patience and love. The nights were long, but Johnny found strength in Dolly's eyes, those faint glimmers of life that seemed to tell him she had not given up. One early morning, as Johnny kept his usual vigil, he noticed something unusual. Dolly was trying to stand. Her fragile legs trembled under her weight, and Johnny held his breath, watching her every move intently. She wobbled and collapsed again, but she didn't give up. With a deep, determined breath, she tried once more. This time she managed to stay on her feet for a few brief seconds before faltering. That fleeting moment was enough to fill Johnny with an overwhelming sense of joy. He knew the road ahead would still be long, but Dolly was fighting and meant everything. As the weeks went by, Dolly began to take tentative steps. At first, it was just a few shaky movements, then a little more. Johnny remained by her side, always there to support her, steadying her when she faltered. Every step she took felt like a triumph, and Johnny's pride was boundless. Her victories were his own. As neighbors passed Johnny's farm, they couldn't help but marvel at the transformation of the young horse. Those who had once urged him to give up now looked at him with admiration, some approaching to inquire about his progress, while others watched quietly from afar, amazed by the unwavering dedication Johnny showed to Dolly over the months. Dolly's transformation became undeniable to both Johnny and all who had once doubted her recovery. The fragile, trembling foal had grown into a strong, elegant mare, with a coat that gleamed under the sun, reflecting the care and love she had received. Every time Johnny looked at Dolly, he saw a testament to resilience and determination. Deep in his heart, pride and gratitude swelled within him. Dolly reminded him of his battles, the silent wars he had fought, the scars that, though unseen, carried the weight of his past. Over time, a quiet yet deep bond developed between Dolly and Johnny. It didn't matter where he was or what he was doing. Dolly always found her way to him, as if she instinctively knew her place was by his side. Johnny often marveled at how she followed him across the farm, her dark, attentive eyes fixed on him, as though every movement he made carried unique significance to her. He would say, "Dolly, my faithful companion," with affection, gently stroking her back. In her characteristic silence, Dolly lowered her head, accepting his touch with a shared understanding. They needed no words, just being together was enough to convey everything they felt. On that particular day, Johnny arrived at the farm with a noticeable heaviness, which Dolly picked up on right away. His steps were slow and his gaze seemed distant, lost in thoughts he couldn't articulate. Without hesitation, Dolly approached him, gently resting her head on his shoulder, as if to share his burden. That simple, heartfelt gesture brought a faint smile to Johnny's face. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, letting the quiet comfort she offered wash over him. He murmured, "Thank you, Dolly," his voice barely above a whisper as he stroked her head. "Sometimes it feels like you're the only one who truly understands." At that moment, Johnny understood that Dolly was not just an animal. She was a kindred spirit, a presence he could rely on even in his darkest hours. Over the years, their bond became so undeniable that the neighbors began to talk about the unique friendship between Johnny and his mare. "It's like they share the same soul," some remarked, while others viewed the connection with quiet respect, as though it represented something sacred and beyond judgment or explanation. To Johnny, every day with Dolly was a blessing. She had transformed from a vulnerable, helpless creature into a beacon of life, inspiring everyone who saw her. She had given him back something he thought he'd lost, a reason to face each day with hope, a companion who filled the silence of his solitude. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, casting the sky in hues of orange, Johnny sat on an old log, his gaze distant and weary. He watched Dolly graze peacefully nearby, but his heart felt heavy, burdened by thoughts he couldn't shake. A gentle smile played on his lips, the kind that comes only to those who have found true peace. Yet his eyes held a deep sadness, quietly reflecting all the struggles and sacrifices that had brought him here. A quiet reflection of all the struggles and sacrifices that had brought him here. He said softly, "Look at this, Dolly," almost to himself. "All the effort, all the time, it was worth it." Dolly lifted her head, as if she had heard him, then slowly approached with her signature graceful, purposeful stride. When she reached him, Johnny extended his hand, and Dolly brushed it gently with her muzzle. It was a silent promise, a connection that transcended words. From that day on, Johnny knew that no matter how many seasons came and went, Dolly would remain an integral part of his life. With her, he did not find only companionship, but also the strength to carry on. Each sunrise they greeted together reaffirmed the decision he had made on that distant morning when he found her weak and alone. The vow Johnny had made to care for Dolly as long as there was breath in his body weighed heavily on him. As the years passed, however, he began to notice his body betraying him in ways it never had before. The boundless energy that once carried him through long days now flickered out too quickly. Mornings had become a battle. Every movement felt heavier, and rising from bed required more willpower than he cared to admit. His heart, once steady and reliable, now faltered unexpectedly, leaving him breathless at the most inconvenient moments. Although he attempted to hide his vulnerability, deep down, Johnny knew something was profoundly wrong. One afternoon, while attempting to lift a heavy sack of grain, a sharp pain seized Johnny's chest. The pressure was so intense that he had to drop the sack and lean against a nearby wall for support. His breaths came in ragged gasps, and for a moment, the world seemed to tilt beneath him. Nearby, Dolly, his loyal mare, raised her head at the sight of his distress. Slowly she approached, pressing her muzzle gently against his shoulder, offering her strength or at least silent encouragement. Johnny reached out, finding comfort in the soft texture of her mane as he struggled to steady himself. He murmured, "Don't worry, Dolly. I've still got this. I've still got you." His voice quiet and laced with doubt, as if trying to convince himself more than her. Yet Dolly's large, soulful eyes seemed to see right through his facade, reflecting an understanding of the pain he worked so hard to hide. In the days that came, Dolly began to stay closer to Johnny, following him across the farm. Her watchful presence became a constant shadow. She was no longer just the steadfast companion of his youth. She had become a silent guardian, always on alert, always near. Johnny felt the weight of her gaze, and while he tried to carry on as if nothing had changed, deep inside, he was grateful for her quiet loyalty. That invisible bond between them felt stronger than ever, a lifeline as his strength started to diminish. Eventually, Johnny had to confront the reality he'd been avoiding. His once tireless days working the farm were long gone. Even the simplest tasks had become insurmountable. With no hesitation, he reached out to his nephew Elliot for help. Elliot, a strong and good-hearted young man, agreed without question and quickly took over the daily responsibilities of feeding the animals, tilling the soil, and handling the chores that had once been Johnny's pride. However, Dolly wasn't so quick to welcome Elliot. She regarded him with quiet suspicion, her guarded demeanor making it clear that Johnny remained the center of her world. No matter how gently Elliot tried to approach her, Dolly would always return to Johnny's side, seeking the comfort of his presence, even if he could barely make it beyond the front door. One afternoon, despite the persistent fatigue weighing on him, Johnny chose to visit Dolly in the corral. Each step felt like an immense struggle, but the thought of seeing his old friend gave him just enough strength to keep going. When he finally arrived, she was already waiting, as if she knew he was coming. Dolly approached him immediately, matching his labored pace, her movements unhurried and deliberate, mirroring his frailty. Johnny whispered, "You always know when I need you, don't you, Dolly?" running a hand along her sleek neck. Dolly leaned into his touch, exhaling softly, her breath slow and steady, as if syncing with his. In those moments, Johnny found solace, a brief reprieve from the relentless toll time had taken on him. Yet, as always, time pressed on, indifferent to their bond, and Johnny's strength continued to fade. As his visits to the corral grew more infrequent, the days when Johnny could linger with Dolly under the open sky became increasingly rare. From the window of his modest home, he would watch her grazing in the distance or standing still, gazing toward the house as though waiting for him to appear. Sometimes, when Elliot left the door open while heading out to the fields, Dolly would approach the porch cautiously. She'd peer inside as if searching for her old friend, hesitant but determined. Seeing her so close brought a bittersweet mix of emotions to Johnny. An ache for what he had lost and a deep gratitude for the steadfast love she continued to offer. The mare, who had once relied on him, now seemed to be watching over him. Their roles had shifted, but their bond remained unbroken. Johnny murmured, "Ah, Dolly," his voice barely audible. "It seems the roles have reversed. Now it's you taking care of me." During those heartfelt moments, an unspoken connection tied them together, a bond that transcended words. On days when getting out of bed was an impossible feat, Elliot stepped in to tend to Dolly in Johnny's place. But whenever Johnny could muster the strength to walk to the pasture, even for a few precious minutes, Dolly was constant with him. It was as if they both knew that every shared moment was irreplaceable, fleeting, yet priceless. The sunlight streaming through the trees and the gentle breeze of the open fields bore silent witness to a love so simple, yet profound. As Johnny's health continued to deteriorate, the bond between him and Dolly deepened, forged in the frailty of life. Each day his condition worsened, and he spent more time confined to his small, modest home. The sunlight that once filled the space now seemed hesitant to intrude, casting only a pale glow through the thin curtains. Every breath became a struggle, the ache in his chest growing more pronounced with each passing hour. His family took turns caring for him, bringing him water and attending to his needs, but no care could keep his mind from wandering far beyond the confines of his room. His thoughts always returned to Dolly. Whenever he could muster the strength to speak, he would ask about her. "Is she all right? Has she been fed? Has anyone let her roam in her favorite spots?" His worry for her lingered, an ever-present weight on his heart. Johnny knew his time was slipping away, and the uncertainty of Dolly's future filled him with a sorrow that felt almost unbearable. One late afternoon, as a brief reprieve from the pain allowed him a moment of clarity, he whispered weakly to his sister, "Elliot, open the window. Please, let me feel the air, hear the fields, and maybe see Dolly." With gentle hands, Elliot pulled back the curtains and swung the window wide. The cool countryside air swept in, bringing a fleeting sense of solace. In the field stood Dolly, her dark silhouette framed by the golden hues of the setting sun. Johnny's heart softened at the sight. Dolly, sensing his gaze, slowly walked toward the house and stopped just shy of the porch, her quiet presence filling the space between light and shadow. She stood motionless as if understanding how fleeting their time together had become. A faint smile touched Johnny's lips, and in a fragile whisper he spoke, "Dolly, my dear Dolly, you've always been so much more than just an animal to me." From that moment on, Dolly seemed acutely aware of Johnny's frailty. Each day she would approach the window, waiting patiently, offering her silent companionship. She stood for hours, a quiet comfort, filling his final days with a peace that words could not express. With his voice breaking under the weight of emotion, Johnny whispered, "Thank you for being here." Dolly's dark eyes met his, filled with a deep understanding that words could never capture. It felt as though the boundary between human and animal had vanished, leaving only pure loyalty, love, and an unspoken farewell. In those moments there were no differences, just the bond of true friendship and a profound love that connected them at their core. As the days passed, Dolly began to show signs of restlessness, as though she sensed an inevitable change approaching. She wandered to the window more often, pacing across the porch, her gaze lingering on Johnny's empty bed. Elliot could tell she sensed the impending loss, though no one could explain how. On a peaceful, melancholic morning, surrounded by those he cherished, Johnny took his last breath. The house fell into heavy silence, broken only by muffled sobs and the soft murmurs of prayers. Johnny's death spread quickly through the small town, and before long friends and neighbors had come together to pay tribute to the kind, gentle man who had touched everyone's heart. Faces reflected the collective grief. Johnny had been more than just another farmer. He was a man who commanded respect, a loyal friend, and an upright soul whose life had touched so many. The family, devastated by his loss, began preparing a funeral that would honor him in the same humble way he had lived his life. The ceremony would be simple, free of elaborate decorations, yet filled with deep reverence and gratitude for the man Johnny had been. In the morning, as the family made arrangements for the service, soft murmurs filled the air, recalling the stories and lessons he had shared with so many in the town. But amidst the mourning there was another heartbreaking in a way words could hardly describe Dolly, the loyal mare who had shared so many mornings with Johnny. She felt the void acutely from the moment he failed to come to the pasture to greet her. For years it had been an unbroken routine. But now the corral was eerily quiet, the gate never swinging open. Confused and unsettled, Dolly paced back and forth, casting hopeful glances toward the house. But as hours passed, she began to search every corner of the property. Her movements grew frantic, and the sorrow in her eyes pierced the hearts of everyone who saw her. Elliot, Johnny's nephew, noticed Dolly's behavior and felt an overwhelming sadness, understanding that she too was grieving the loss just as incomprehensible and unbearable to her as it was to them. Fearing that Dolly might disrupt the funeral, Elliot and the family led her to the barn and locked her inside until the ceremony was over. However, as soon as Dolly realized she was confined, her distress became uncontrollable. She began kicking furiously at the stall door, pounding the ground with her hooves and letting out loud, frantic whinnies. "Dolly," Elliot murmured under his breath, though he knew there was no calming her. Each strike of her hooves echoed through the stillness, a raw expression of anguish. It was her way of protesting, refusing to accept the separation from Johnny. Being kept away from him at such a time was an unbearable tension she could not comprehend. Yet the family had no choice but to keep her enclosed, fearing her presence might disrupt the solemn ceremony. As friends and family gathered in the yard, Dolly's anguish reverberated from the barn, her wails carrying over the quiet gathering. Each sound was laced with a deep guttural pain could feel. Some mourners turned their eyes toward the barn, heavy-hearted, acutely aware that the mare was grieving as deeply as they were. Her sorrow hung in the air like a tangible force, amplifying the weight of the loss they all shared. The funeral ceremony unfolded in a heavy silence, each mourner taking their turn to say goodbye to Johnny. There were no grand speeches, only the quiet sorrow of those who had loved him. Faces were downcast, and eyes filled with deep respect for the man whose life had touched so many. The air was thick with grief as the gathered family and friends reflected on his legacy, the weight of his absence palpable. From the stable, the rhythmic pounding of hooves echoed through the stillness, a desperate symphony of longing. Dolly, unable to bear the separation, struck the door with increasing force, her heart restless. Each blow seemed to carry her anguish, until finally, with a deafening crash, the door gave way. She galloped out, her speed and power shocking those nearby, parting the mourners in fear and confusion. Her wild race to the ceremony was a painful reminder of the bond she had shared with Johnny and the loss they both now endured. The solemn atmosphere of the funeral shattered suddenly, as a wave of startled murmurs swept through the gathered crowd. People instinctively stepped back, making way for the unexpected arrival, but Dolly pressed forward with an unrelenting drive. Her dark, piercing eyes blazed with determination, a mixture of grief and resolve that no one could deny. It became clear with each step that she wasn't simply running, she was searching, her heart desperate for something, or someone. Her gaze finally fixed upon Johnny's coffin, and without hesitation, Dolly surged forward. She stopped only when she reached it, raising one powerful hoof and striking the wooden surface with a resounding crack. The sound silenced the murmurs around her. Again she struck, her powerful hooves pounding with a force that sent tremors through the air. Each strike carried a weight far beyond mere instinct, as if she were trying to communicate something urgent, something no one could understand. "Dolly, stop!" a relative shouted, cautiously approaching her. But Dolly refused to yield. There was a force behind her actions that no human command could suppress. Her strikes echoed with the deep, unspoken bond she shared with Johnny, a testament to a loyalty that transcended any barrier. As confusion gripped the mourners, a few brave souls stepped forward to try and calm her, but their efforts were futile. Dolly's determination was unshakable, and her relentless hooves resounded like a mournful chant that filled the tense air. Then, with one particularly forceful blow, the wood of the coffin splintered slightly, creating a small crack. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Johnny's sister, her face a mix of dread and hope, stepped forward, drawn by an inexplicable compulsion. Kneeling beside the coffin, her trembling hands brushed the fractured surface. She leaned in and pressed her ear to the crack. At first, there was only the heavy silence of death, but then a faint sound of a whisper reached her ears. Her eyes widened in shock, and she pulled away, her voice trembling. There's something inside." Her words sent a jolt through the crowd, freezing everyone in place. Time seemed to stop. Spurred into action, a few men stepped forward, hands shaking as they pried open the coffin's lid. Dolly stood motionless nearby, her eyes fixed on the coffin, her gaze intense and unwavering. The air thickened with anticipation as the men worked, the creaking wood amplifying the tension. Finally, with one last effort, the lid was lifted, revealing Johnny's still form. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd when, against all odds, a faint, almost imperceptible sound of a sigh emerged from within. It was barely audible but unmistakable. A fragile thread of life still clung to him. Frozen in shock, the mourners stared in stunned silence. "He's alive!" someone cried, their voice breaking with emotion. A wave of disbelief and exhilaration swept over the crowd. Slowly, Johnny's eyelids fluttered open. He blinked against the daylight streaming into his face. Confusion etched across his features as he tried to make sense of what had just happened. His eyes, still unfocused, gradually began to settle, scanning the astonished faces surrounding him. Disoriented, he searched desperately for something familiar. In the midst of what felt like dreamlike chaos, Johnny's weak body stirred, and his gaze finally found Dolly. The faithful mare stood quietly to one side, her head slightly tilted as if waiting patiently for their reunion. "Dolly," Johnny whispered, his voice barely audible and frail with exhaustion. Despite his weakened state, the sight of his steadfast companion filled him with a profound sense of peace, a reassurance that, against all odds, he had returned from a place where few ever came back. Hearing her name, Dolly slowly moved toward him. Her large, dark eyes locked onto his, and in that gaze there was something unspoken, a connection that transcended human understanding. It was a bond so deep it seemed to defy even death itself. Johnny's family, witnessing the miracle before their eyes, wept openly. The miracle they had dared not hope for had come to pass. Gratitude mixed with disbelief as they absorbed the extraordinary sight of Johnny, alive. His sister, overcome with emotion, approached hesitantly. She gently took his hand, crying silently as she held him. Others stood by, wiping tears from their cheeks, casting reverent glances toward Dolly. They were beginning to understand the depth of her loyalty. It was Dolly's unwavering devotion that had kept Johnny from slipping away into eternal rest. A family member said, "Thank you, Dolly." Their voice choked with emotion. It was she who saved you. Johnny, still disoriented, gave a faint nod. Though his mind struggled to grasp the events, his heart was certain of the truth. Dolly's steadfast love had shielded him, pulling him back from the brink of death. The murmurs of the crowd were interrupted by the arrival of the town doctor, who had rushed over at the commotion. He knelt beside Johnny, checking his pulse and vital signs. After a moment, he exhaled in relief and addressed the group with measured authority. "What Johnny experienced is an extremely rare condition called catalepsy," he explained. "In this state, the body becomes utterly immobile, and breathing so faint it mimics death. Many mistake it for the real thing." Turning to Johnny's family, he continued, "It's rare, but it happens. Somehow Johnny's bond with Dolly must have allowed her to sense what we could not, that he was still alive, though imperceptibly so. She made us realize he was still here." The crowd nodded slowly, gazing at Dolly, whose calm, steady presence stood in stark contrast to the storm of emotions around her. She remained by Johnny's side, unshaken, as if she had always known what others had only just discovered. To Johnny, the world was slowly becoming real again with every breath. He reached out a trembling hand toward Dolly, who gently lowered her muzzle to meet him. The warmth and texture of her skin confirmed the truth: he was alive. Life itself had reclaimed him, and it was Dolly who had kept him tethered to this world. "Thank you, Dolly," Johnny whispered, his voice soft but laden with gratitude. Dolly seemed to understand, her large dark eyes reflecting a wisdom that words could not express. Those watching the scene were overcome with emotion. Some wept openly, while others stood in hushed reverence, realizing they had witnessed something extraordinary, a testament to loyalty and love that went beyond the ordinary. After the miraculous reunion, Johnny's family carried him home, treating him with the utmost care as if he were made of glass. They were keenly aware of his fragility after such a harrowing brush with death. In the days that followed, the house was filled with warmth and vigilance. Johnny's loved ones never left his side, tending to him with unwavering devotion and cherishing every moment of his second chance at life. No one was as attentive as Dolly, who had become his unwavering shadow. The first time Johnny managed to step into the pasture after days of rest, Dolly stood waiting for him, her patience almost tangible. She approached cautiously, as if sensing that he was still regaining his strength. Johnny, still frail, extended his arms, and with a silent embrace he leaned into her. Dolly stood steady, offering him the comfort of her presence as though it could restore the energy he had lost. Johnny whispered again, "Thank you, Dolly," his voice softly but filled with emotion too profound to express. Had it not been for Dolly's extraordinary presence, he knew he might not be there. From that moment on, Dolly was no longer just a horse to Johnny. She had become a part of his soul, a companion with whom he shared a bond that transcended words. As the days passed, their bond only grew stronger. Johnny's strength gradually returned, and with each passing day his family was filled with gratitude for the second chance they had been given. In their eyes, Dolly was no longer just an animal. She had become an irreplaceable member of their family, cherished by everyone. Dolly's unwavering loyalty and calm demeanor had earned her the love and respect of all who lived under Johnny's roof. As news of the miracle spread through the small town, the tale of Johnny and Dolly quickly became legendary. The story was shared over dinner tables at family gatherings and even captivated the youngest member of the community. Each retelling of the incredible event was filled with awe and admiration, as neighbors marveled at how a simple horse had accomplished the impossible, awakening Johnny from what had seemed like an endless, irreversible sleep. Dolly, to many, became a living symbol of true loyalty and love, a love so pure and strong that it transcended the boundaries of life and death. As Johnny's strength continued to improve, he spent more and more time with Dolly, Their afternoons became a sacred ritual of silent walks through the fields together. The bond between them transcended words, their connection speaking volumes in silence. To Johnny, each step with Dolly was a reminder of the profound lessons she had taught him. Life is fragile, every moment is a gift, and true love can defy even death itself. The townsfolk, watching Johnny and Dolly move as one, were filled with reverence and admiration. Some even said it was like witnessing a daily miracle, a tangible manifestation of a bond not explained by logic. The sight of Johnny and Dolly together filled the town with a fresh wave of hope, stirring something profound in everyone who witnessed it. It was as though the community itself had been touched by their extraordinary bond, a bond that gave them something to believe in. Over time, Johnny and Dolly's story became much more than a simple tale. It became a legend, a story that transcended the boundaries of a single family and touched the hearts of everyone in the community. Their tale of love and steadfast loyalty reminded all that even in life's darkest moments, the power of friendship could defy death itself. Profoundly aware of the lessons Dolly had shared, Johnny made it his mission to care for her with the same tenderness and devotion she had offered him. He looked at her with a tenderness that only someone who had brushed with death could truly understand. Although he knew he could never fully repay her for everything she had done, he sought to express his gratitude with every gentle word and touch. "Dolly, you're my friend, my family, my miracle," he would murmur, his hand gliding over her silky mane. Dolly, as always, gazed at him with serene eyes, her calm expression exuding a timeless wisdom. It was as if she could understand every unspoken thought and emotion he carried. Johnny eventually returned to life on the farm, but his perspective had shifted. He cherished each sunrise and every quiet moment spent with his steadfast companion. His experience had taught him the fragility of life, and he knew that every day with Dolly was a gift. The story of Johnny and Dolly grew far beyond that of a simple farm tale. It became a powerful reminder of the sacred bonds that could exist between beings, whether human or animal. It was a testament to loyalty, love, and the unspoken connections that transcended species and circumstance. Through their story, the people of the town were reminded that love and empathy possess the power to transform, even in the face of insurmountable odds. Dolly's quiet devotion saved Johnny from certain death, proving that true connection knows no boundaries, whether of species or circumstance. Their story became a beacon of hope, a testament to the priceless value of true loyalty, a treasure capable of working miracles in life's most unexpected moments. As Johnny and Dolly continued their lives together, they remained bound by a sacred connection that overcame all challenges. Their bond had become a symbol for the town, reminding everyone that even the smallest, quietest acts of love could change the world. And so, life on the farm went on amidst the daily grind and serene countryside, infused with a renewed sense of purpose. Their story would continue to inspire anyone who heard it, a tale of unwavering loyalty and love, a love that transcended the imaginable. The message was clear: cherish the bonds we nurture, as even the connections we share with animals can offer boundless solace, strength, and love. If this story has touched your heart, please don't forget to like, share, and leave a comment telling us how it inspired you. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. May God bless you and walk with you every step of your journey.